Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm writing to what it means by appearance in consciousness. Does pure consciousness have characteristics? So again, I do want to kind of watch a little bit more videos about appearance in consciousness, just because I think I do have an understanding of it, but I want to hear different gurus and swamis talk about it because I want to hear the different interpretations of it. And kind of like, how does it manifest though? That sounds manifesto. So consciousness and gunas. I remember hearing gunas, but in a very few videos. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Pretty short one though.
Dr. Daniel D. asks or says, I'm a devoted follower of your talks on YouTube. But when you say all is an appearance in consciousness, what do you mean? Sir James Jeans, the late physicist, said that we are an idea in the mind of God. Might this be something like what you mean by an appearance in consciousness? Also, is it permitted to think about characteristics of awareness/pure consciousness? For example, I think of pure consciousness as loving. Is pure consciousness active and thinks and therefore creates all that is? And then Mangesh asks, how...
All right, let's just take that one first. Okay. There's a lot there. What do you mean that things appear in pure consciousness? I mean just that. Look at your experience right now. One way of understanding our experience right now are things appearing in consciousness. Here I have people, colors and shapes, space and depth appearing in consciousness.
Okay. Okay. Whenever we said it that way, it kind of popped in my mind what I thought of a long time ago, which is so things appearing in our consciousness for me is I am conscious. Again, my idea of what our consciousness, because again, in Advaita Vedanta, there only is consciousness, nothing else. To me, it's a little bit different where we have our consciousness in our mind somewhere, maybe. The only reason why I believe that is because of experience. And what I mean by that is that that's the only way I experience life. Through these eyes, through these hands, through this body, through the consciousness. But I don't have the global or the consciousness is idea. I don't know what that is. I have no experience in that. So for me to say I believe in that would just be literally a belief, which goes back to me, a Western religion, which is belief. I'm not that kind of person. So, so that's the reason why my belief in terms of consciousness, at least for now, until something changes, is that it's in the mind. Which, again, isn't necessarily false, because the consciousness in terms of Advaita Vedanta, the consciousness illumines through our mind anyway, so it's there. It's just not there, I guess you could say. So, and then, so how everything is experienced through consciousness is that fact when you touch something, you're not experiencing it right here. It's, matter of fact, traveling up to your brain, and your brain is manifesting it in your consciousness. And then it manifesting in your consciousness means that you're aware of it. So everything that you experience manifests in your consciousness. That's why you're conscious of it. I think that's how my theory kind of works. How does it precisely work? Not exactly sure. But in terms of when you experience something, it manifests in your consciousness, therefore you are conscious of it, therefore you are able to react to it. If you're not if it doesn't manifest in your consciousness, you do not consciously experience it. So you don't know anything about it. So people who don't feel pain because it doesn't manifest in their consciousness, because the nerves doesn't get up to the consciousness, then you don't know it. So anyways.
I have sound appearing in consciousness. Appearing means being experienced. That's all. I have the sense of a body and warmth and all appearing in consciousness. Is it warm? You can put on the fan. It's right behind you. You want to put on the fan? Yeah. Right. Isn't that how we experience life? As experiences. And what is an experience? Things appear in consciousness.
Yeah.
That's what consciousness is. Things appear in consciousness, things disappear in consciousness. presence and absence of objects of experience. That's what life is. All right. Now, we are an idea in the mind of God. James Jean said that. Is it something like that? No, not quite. Because the mind, I'm not saying that it's like thinking. Things appear in consciousness is not a fancy way of saying that we think of things. No. The mind appears in consciousness. And literally, this is what I mean. In deep sleep, for example, the mind does not appear. It goes to sleep. The external world does not appear. Only you exist, but there's nothing to experience. There's just the absence. You can say and sometimes Advaitins say that the absence is experienced in deep sleep. It's not an experience of absence. It's not an absence of experience. Rather, deep sleep is an experience of absence. If there is experience, there must be consciousness. There's no possibility of any experience without consciousness. So things appear in consciousness. The mind also appears in consciousness. Can we say consciousness is loving? Only in a rather peculiar sense. To be loving, you must be a person with a mind and a heart and emotion. But the impersonal consciousness is loving only in this sense, like the sky is loving, for example. The vast blue sky, it is spacious and inclusive of anything and everything. To exist physically, you must be in space. So space in that sense is all-inclusive. In that sense, pure consciousness is loving because it is vast and spacious, luminous, and therefore it enables all things to exist and reveals all things in that sense. But it's a very philosophical way of saying loving.
So is he trying to say in this part that just because it's part of the experience that it is that experience? So I guess I'm trying to think of a great way to kind of summarize or grab an example of that, but can't really think of anything. The best way is just the world example itself. I guess kind of like because I exist in consciousness, that consciousness includes me in it. It's not to say that consciousness is me, but includes me, I guess. That's not a great example. I guess we can do the loving one, maybe try that one. Because loving exists in Maya, and obviously everything in Maya is consciousness, so therefore if it exists in consciousness, it is part of consciousness. It's not that consciousness is generating it. So love is part of consciousness because it's part of the experience, not because consciousness self is perhaps manifesting it per se.
What was the last part?
Also, is it permitted to think about characteristics of awareness / pure?
No, it's not permitted. Why not? Why not? Characteristics, or in Nyaya language, they are qualities, guna, qualities. Qualities belong to substances. So the table is brown. This one is brown. Brown is the characteristic. But where does the brown exist? Not in this. It's not floating in the sky. It exists in this table, in the altar. This flower is pink, white and pink. Where do the white and the pink exist? In the flower. They're not floating in the sky. Characteristics exist in substances. This is sort of basic philosophy. Now, if you say there are characteristics in consciousness, they must be existing in some substance. And we'll say, yeah, I told you, they exist in consciousness. But if the characteristics are objective, because you're speaking about it, the substance also must be objective. Then it cannot be consciousness. It's an object to consciousness. Characteristics will always be existing in objects. Objects have characteristics, characteristics exist in objects, and they are revealed to consciousness. Consciousness itself is not an object, and therefore does not have characteristics.
Oh, well, that's enough that, I guess. Yes. Although that's kind of confusing, because is that object not consciousness itself as well? Consciousness itself is not an object. But wouldn't consciousness be all things? Object and non-object. It's not limited to an object for sure, because all objects are it. Right? all that exists is consciousness. If it's an object, it is consciousness. If it's not an object but it exists, it's consciousness as well. Right? Uh, Let me know how you explain this part. This is the all objects have characteristics, which is part of consciousness, right? Again, this is my mentality in terms of how I understand Advaita Vedanta in terms of Brahman or consciousness. Like nothing else, nothing else exists outside of consciousness. So therefore, anything that you experience is consciousness. And but I guess perhaps maybe the way if I were to word this myself to understand it, is that consciousness is not limited to the characteristics, because consciousness is not limited in general. It's not limited to a object, and it's not limited to all objects. Because it is all objects and more, I guess, if you can say it that way. So it's like saying consciousness is just not limited to one pen. It's also not limited to all pens, because there are pencils and mechanical pencils out there. It's also all those things. Existing objects. It cannot be consciousness. I The characters are. It's not an object. So let me know if my translation of that makes sense, if that's how it's meant, how perhaps it could be interpreted. Because consciousness itself is not objects. Un- Unless the only other way, if I were to understand it that way, would be if I were to grab this object. But for me to experience this would be as not an object. For me to experience this is not an object. And what I mean by that is because all the experiencing is in the mind, through consciousness. And so what you're experiencing is consciousness, which is not the object, if that makes sense. I get the information from me grabbing it and looking at it and feeling it and tasting it and hearing it if it makes a noise. And that information is translated into something that I can consciously experience. So therefore, it is not the object that I'm experiencing, but consciousness itself. Consciousness that's replicating, it almost seems like replicating the object itself. Because how else am I to know that it's long and thin and has a cap? Because that's satisfying. Because the consciousness, the experience that I'm experiencing of this object is exactly the same as the object itself. If that makes sense. I didn't mean to go into this thing getting myself a little bit confused, a little bit. Again, because I've understand the greater scheme of Advaita Vedanta a little bit, but I want to keep diving deep into the appearance of consciousness, because this one there's a couple ways I'll look at it. There's the grand scheme of things. I guess hopefully maybe it's pure Advaita Vedanta where everything is consciousness, or there is only consciousness. It's like the dream example, where there's no difference between us and a rock and an animal and a bird and atoms in the air or whatever. It's all one the same consciousness. Whereas this one seems like a duality a little bit, where I am able to experience objects externally from the body and then experience it in my consciousness through our five senses. Huh. Consciousness itself is not an object. Again, or the third interpretation, which is perhaps what he perhaps a better understanding for this for me, or perhaps maybe he meant to say this, I'm not sure, is that consciousness itself is not limited to an object. Because consciousness is everything. So therefore, one object is not consciousness, but it is part of consciousness.
Consciousness itself is not an object and therefore does not have characteristics.
Yeah, as in, it doesn't have characteristics because doesn't have characteristics like color. That's a bit of a tougher one. The characteristics are. I like thinking. Hold on, I'm gonna pause real quick. Okay, it was actually pretty simple. Took about 30 seconds to think of this. Everything technically is an object, even characteristics are objects, because the white paint is a physical object. The shape of a bottle is still a physical object. So all these physicalities are you can't describe consciousness with the limitation of objects. So perhaps that's what he means by that, where you can't put a characteristic to something that's infinite, because it's all characteristics, not one characteristics. It is all objects, because it's not limited to one object. It itself is existence. So you cannot limit existence to one thing, so therefore you cannot give it that one thing. Maybe that's the way he means it? Let me know in the comments. This got a little bit more complicated, more complicated than I thought it would have. But again, trying to understand the minutiae of things here. So that's my reaction to what this means that appearance and consciousness, as pure consciousness, have characteristics. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, the stand down below. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next vid.